What is the excitement level surrounding Marlins camp right now? I'm joined by Ely Sussman. That's coming up on today's Locked on Marlins.
You are Locked on Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked on Marlins. I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger. You can hit me up over at Jeremiah Geiger2 on X. And thank you for making Locked on Marlins your first listen of the day, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you hit the YouTube channel, leave a comment, leave a like. And joining me today is Ely Sussman, the founder of Fish on First. Eli, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Every day is a good day during spring training. Speaking on an off day, this is as good as it gets when we've had a whole lot of spring training baseball to dissect. And now looking ahead, getting pretty close to the start of the season. So I'm doing great. First time as a guest of yours on this particular platform, but we've spoken before. I've been on Locked On before in previous iterations. So I'm glad to be on again. Anytime you need me, glad to chop it up.
Yeah, you're definitely one of the best to do it, providing some great coverage down there with the Fish on First. And the excitement level this spring training, at least for me, I tend to overreact, at the beginning of each season. You're such a super fan that you tend to really overplay certain aspects of players or performances, and that's all fun and good, but what is the realistic excitement level that you have, covering this team on a day-to-day basis as we head closer to opening day?
All of it is kind of based on where you set the expectations. And that's been a big difference compared to last year, of course. Last year, coming off a postseason berth the previous year, but because of the organizational changes they made coming into 2024, because of the way that Peter Bendix was a little bit evasive with how he was communicating his plan for the organization moving forward, there was no doubt a lot of awkwardness at this time a year ago. And yeah, there's nothing that really puts a damper on a team atmosphere when you're a little unclear about what the direction of the organization is, and when you fear that you can't live up to what the previous team did. Now we're heading into this year. The expectations are as low as they could possibly be for the major league team. And with that in mind, it means that all these little positive developments that we see are exhilarating, because anything that any indication, any glimpse that gives us reason to believe that this team in 2025 could be competitive in any particular aspect. I mean, that would be a win. That would be more than it feels like the organization isn't necessarily prioritizing that for this year. And yet you have players taking it upon themselves, players, some with the influence of the new coaching and player development apparatus around the Marlins, that are better than they were a few months ago when we previously saw them. So relative to expectations, it's hard not to be thrilled with what's happened so far during the course of spring training. Again, that has to come into the context that the ceiling of this team in 2025 is still relatively limited, just because of how few actual legitimate major league players they have by design. So many guys that are either cast-offs of previous organizations or ones that hadn't really shown a whole lot of ability developed by the Marlins in previous years. So I think it's been fun to this point in spring training to see a handful of guys show a little bit more like tangible talent, quantifiable talent than we may have thought coming into spring training just a few weeks ago.
I think one of the exciting points to hit on so far early on in Grapefruit League action has been the jump in the pitching staff development. You see guys throwing harder, significantly harder, like Robbie Snelling, for example, hitting 97 miles per hour. We see the pitch characteristics on Max Meyer's fastball, and I dove into that on yesterday's show, just how much improvement you're seeing on that particular pitch. Of course, when you scale it back, it's only a couple outings so far. So the season is so long, and we could be sitting here in August, and pitching especially is so volatile in today's game that you don't want to, I guess, jump the gun and pencil in, okay, this is going to be consistent the whole way through, but the signs are there. And it's something as an optimist, as an optimistic fan, you want to hang on to. I think the biggest thing, my takeaway, is the pitching, just seeing Sandy come back healthy, seeing the velocity jump from a guy like Snelling or Meyer or even Valente Bayoza, who's battling for that fifth spot. So the hitting, we'll probably talk a little bit about that in the second segment, just because I think it's still lagging behind the pitching development. There's more intrigue from my perspective when you have guys like Jansen Junk, who showed up really well against the New York Mets, struck out Juan Soto. I mean, those are things to hang your hat on, but the hitting's just a tad behind, I think, in from a developmental standpoint. Would you agree with that? How do you feel about the pitching staff so far?
Right. So it's a combination of things. One that you touched on is pitchers coming back from injuries and looking as good as they were before, if not even better. In addition to the guys you mentioned, I'd throw in Dax Fulton as well, who was
Yeah.
off the grid for a couple of years, coming back from his second Tommy John. And just we're talking the day after his most recent pitching appearance, where not only was his stuff really good, but the quality of his changeup really took a pretty significant step forward, even from what I remember when he was one of our top rated prospects a few years ago at Fish on First. So the combination of guys coming back from injuries looking like themselves, another guy you touched on, Jansen Junk, for example, one of my writers, Nate Karsmer, spoke to him last night about what he's done to like perform the way that he has so far in camp. And he just relayed this story about how he shows up in camp and immediately the Marlins make this small tweak to his sweeper grip, just a like really subtle adjustment to his grip itself, and how he's seeing almost immediate dividends from that. It's a combination of things of guys who seem to be putting in the work independently on their own or in off-season labs to get better, but then also coming to camp, and then the coaching staff is already prepared with like particular adjustments that they think make a lot of sense. So this Marlins organization prior to the Bendix era was known for its pitching development as well. This just shows there's another way to do it where it's like it or not, it's going to be heavily analytics influenced, where they just look at little adjustments and say, if your mechanics change in this regard, if your pitch mix changes in this way, the expected results would change in another way. And so it's not going to be 100% success rate. That's ultimately what the regular season is going to show. But we can already see the way that these pitchers that were really lowly regarded from previous organizations, ones that didn't seem to have a ton of value or prestige around the industry, if they show up with like particular adjustments that complement what they already do well. That's part of it as well, where if you make the right blends, this is going to be the key for the Marlins going forward, is coming up with these analytically influenced adjustments that also make sense for the particular pitcher. So it seems across the board, a lot of different guys are showing up with sweepers in particular. That's kind of been an industry-wide trend where it's like this pitch, if we get to move in this way, hitters are just going to have a very difficult time calibrating their swing for the way that that pitch moves. But at the same time, beyond that, with each individual guy, there are other adjustments that if you put in the manpower to like actually gather all the data on this stuff, the success rate is like pretty high in terms of what solutions you could come up with that make sense for particular guys based on who they are individually. So that blends between staying on top of the latest industry trends, but also customizing improvement plans for each pitcher. I think that whole thing is new. I think that you have to say is a combination of attention to detail and actual manpower that I don't think this whole player development system previously had.
I think Max Meyer in particular, when he's adding a sweeper, the sweeper is a huge emphasis for the Marlins with multiple pitchers. He talked about Junk and the tweaking the grip on that particular pitch, and Max Meyer adding that through the offseason to develop it as a weapon against right-handers, adding that sinker, and he's becoming slowly more comfortable with the pitch. I think he could be a breakout candidate this season, along with Ryan Weathers. So those two in particular, obviously Sandy, Do you think those adjustments that he's made in particular are here for the long run? Because I'm a believer right now.
Believer in Max, he's a fascinating one because for me, I felt I was a little higher than most on him at the end of last season, where I felt last year was a season you could kind of throw away. And now part of that is uh Marlins Marlins have to take some responsibility in the way that Max went through last year, where clearly they weren't on the same page in terms of why it is he was sent down to AAA, how he should, what he could do during the course of that summer to like prepare him to be a major league pitcher. Because when he showed up the second half of last year, as people know, he really struggled and seemed as far away from being realizing his potential as he had been during the course of his pro career. I don't like the way that things were handled last year. But at the same time, given that it was his first year back from being off with Tommy John, I knew that the results themselves could be a little bit misleading. And as you point out, to his credit, he's in addition to just getting physically back to where he should be, there's also the expansion of his pitch mix, and now that very particular sweeper that he added in addition to his slider that I think can make him a more complete pitcher. That part I buy in on. Um, the thing with him is like even when he was universally one of the top rated prospects in this organization, still very understandable reliever risk to him because of the effort in his delivery, because he is still, even with added strength this offseason, he's undersized by normal starting pitching standards. Even when he's been successful in the past, he's somebody that I wouldn't say that he gets super high marks for his pitchability. I didn't feel like he ever prioritized being efficient with his pitches, sequencing in ways that would get him through a lineup quickly. Um, I still think the ceiling on him is not particularly exciting until we see it over the course of longer outings. I don't know if he's going to get to that place where he's working deep into his starts and where he's in a situation where he has top of the rotation potential, but certainly by expanding the pitch mix the way that he has, by simply improving his fastball from the version we saw last year, I think the floor is a lot higher. It's a lot easier to see him as a piece of this starting rotation depth chart for the foreseeable future. And that in itself would probably surprise people considering where he was just a few months ago. So I think overall, when I look at these pitchers and what they're showing in camp, especially at this stage of camp, it's easier to point to a guy and say that, wow, in short samples, he should be effective. Like at the very least, he's somebody that should miss some bats with the combination of pitches that he has, because the starters themselves are not stretched out whatsoever yet, because they haven't had to work more than once through a lineup in any setting, either on the backfields or in game situations yet. I think it's premature to try to project what this looks like over the course of an actual regular season start scenario. But with Max, with Ryan Weathers, with Jansen Junk, with a lot of these guys, I think there's reason to believe that on a per inning basis, these guys are going to be more effective than last year's staff. 2024 Marlins, very quietly, were one of the worst pitching staffs in baseball. I mean, they just allowed a ton of runs, too many walks. They were just bad in every single regard, both the peripherals and the actual run prevention. But in a lot of individual cases, you could point to guys that I think when they are going to be on the mound this season, they're going to perform more like a vintage Marlins pitching staff. I think certainly that's going to be more of the strength of this team, while the hitting is still somewhat of a mystery box.
And that's going to come up in the next segment as we talk about the strengths and the weaknesses. I love what you said, though, vintage Marlins pitching staff. That's going to come up. We're going to talk about the strengths, weaknesses, hitting, pitching. How does that look like moving forward right after this? Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. If you love the no shells variety, it's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. Whether you're snacking at your desk, on a road trip, or you just need a quick protein boost, they're always a go to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein. It provides all 9 essential amino acids, and these little green wonders pack a protein punch. Grab the no shells Wonderful Pistachios for that grab and go ease, or if you like the satisfying crack of opening each shell, like snack meditation, grab the in shell options. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. And we're back here with Ely Sussman from Fish on First. Be sure to check out all his content. They have podcasts and spaces over on X and great daily media coverage. So when you're done watching or listening to the pod, be sure to check out great group of guys over there. And we're talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the Miami Marlins as it pertains to early on in camp. And for me, Eli, it's very obvious to me. There's too much swing and miss right now in the lineup. I think that is very obvious. There are going to be a ton of strikeouts. Very high power guys that haven't seemed to always put it together at the major league level, whether that's Jesus Sanchez or Griffin Conine, who debuted last year, but there's still a question mark as an everyday player, Kyle Stowers, and then new addition Matt Mervis. Between those guys, those are a ton of strikeouts. I think that's the biggest glaring weakness right now.
Right. The key, I think the hope with this team is for those guys in particular to make some sort of strides with their plate discipline and their pitch identification to get themselves in better counts, understanding that the swing and miss is going to be there, but putting them in situations where hopefully they can sit on certain pitches and tap into their power more often. So understanding that there's going to be limitations in terms of the total number of hits and base runners that this team has, but at the very least, potential for them to hit a lot more homers than they did a year ago or the previous couple of years. That's been the ingredient missing. And when they're kind of in this awkward, this is what happens with a lot of rebuilding teams, with the Marlins in particular, coming from a place where they just had totally wiped out farm system in terms of actual genuine hitting prospects. While you wait for a couple of those guys to come through the system, you take flyers on guys that are a little bit incomplete as those offensive players and hope that they can, even if they have certain physical limitations, that maybe with more experience, they're better able to process what pitchers are trying to do to them and then to make those adjustments accordingly right there. I think to this stage in spring training, nobody has hit more than one home run for this Marlins team over the course of spring training games. So I think that is kind of what we were talking about, where expectations being relatively low for this offense. And if any one guy could even put together a brief hot power surge during spring training, that'd be something to get excited about. But with this group, it's just been like individual moments where you see high quality at bats that really impress you. But unfortunately, nobody that's really gone on a heater thus far to show you that among those guys that you mentioned, the ones that have interesting power potential, but severe approach issues and potential swing and miss limitations. Yeah, it's hard to really circle any individual one to get all that thrilled about. I do want to just take a moment though to shout out Agustin Ramirez and how well he has looked in all of his at bats during the course of spring training. He at this moment is, I think, to me, very clearly the most trustworthy young hitter that the Marlins have in their organization in terms of somebody that once he reaches the big leagues should not only stay around in a pretty consistent role, but I just think is such a well-rounded hitter where his approach is already at an extremely high level. His raw power is close to as good as anybody else's in this organization right now. And I think he's just come a long way offensively, even from where he was like a year ago when he was way down on Yankees individual prospect lists. Now at this point, he's somebody that if there's anybody here that you circle and say he should be an everyday piece of this lineup for a long time to come, the quality of Ramirez's plate appearances during spring training have given me a lot of confidence in that. The thing is it's hard to teach that. There's a lot of natural talent there. And that is, it continues to be the key for the Marlins long term is they're ultimately going to, whatever they seem to be tapping into on the pitching development side, they'll have to figure out something similar on the hitting development side as well in order to when they have early round draft picks, when they have guys that this type of natural ability to better be able to unlock that ability, because that is ultimately what held back this team in recent years is the inability to get these guys to be the best version of themselves. And right now it's just slim pickings in terms of guys that seem suited to be everyday players.
Realistically, I mean, the Marlins have to have a 26-man roster. They have to put 9 players on the diamond every day for 162 games. So there's going to be a lot of faces, a lot of guys getting at bats, I'm sure, this season. But realistically, moving forward, is there anybody right now in camp? Maybe they're on the 40 man, maybe they're a prospect who have impressed you, but that you feel fairly confident in saying, I think the Marlins view him as a potential cornerstone player. Because for me, I see Xavier Edwards, I see Connor Norby, the organization likes those two, and Augustine Ramirez, because that I think the floor with his bat is so high compared to a guy like De Los Santos. But is there anybody else that stands out to you, or is it just going to be a constant turnover for this season?
Well, this is one that I think we might have to wait all the way till the end of the season to see him, but it's been a good spring for Joe Mack as well, coming off a fantastic 2024 season as well. And with him, it starts with the fact that he's going to stick at catcher for a Marlins team that has had this constant carousel of catchers over the last 6 years, since in the post JT Real Muto era. And the ones that they've held on to, really the only guy that's been a constant for a few years, Nick Fortes, has just very frustratingly not been able to become the hitter that he seems like he might initially be a few years ago. And now they have somebody in Mac that you can trust to be a catcher. And exactly how he fits with Ramirez moving forward is going to be a great problem to have in terms of how they split up those catching reps. But Mac is the one that you can trust defensively and somebody that has power to all fields. He's had an inconsistent minor league career, and he's one of those few really positive examples of a player that took a huge performance leap forward from 2023 to 2024 in this organization. All of a sudden, he was better able I think he attributes it more to his own mechanical adjustments that he made that allowed him to become a plus power hitter. And the question with him is going to be just his general hitting ability. How many singles are going to be mixed in with those extra base hits? Are there going to be enough in order to make him a true everyday player that you want in the lineup, or is he going to be somebody that's more so a somebody that relies on his homer and his defense and has some holes in between? So not a perfect player, but somebody, one of those few shining examples of a guy that was originally drafted by the Marlins and that after some inconsistency, I think has reached a place where you can realistically depend on him to be some piece of this team's future. So almost certainly going to start the season in AAA. And then we'll see how it plays out between Ramirez, between Liam Hicks as well. Liam Hicks basically locked into the opening day roster. That caught some people by surprise that they were using a Rule 5 pick on him and have him on this active roster, maybe as more than just a placeholder. At the very least, he's going to be a placeholder. But I think they like what Liam Hicks has done this spring, both offensively and defensively. So it's the catching position, the whole outlook on that position is so much better than it was a year ago. I'll give them credit for that.
Well, Joe Mack, you touched on it. And the great thing about him sticking as catcher, he got drafted out of a New York high school, and the bat was lagging behind his defense, but he has the arm to stick at catcher. And, with a profile like that in today's baseball, like Major League Baseball, a catcher doesn't have to have a great hit tool to necessarily provide impact. There's a very few catchers right now that have the average, the power combination. You look at somebody like Cal Raleigh in Seattle, who's one of the top catchers in the game. He's going to hit for a low average, but he provides that pop. So if Matt can adjust to breaking balls at the major league level, and obviously starting out in the AAA level, I think that's going to be a positive because I really like him as well. I think he's the catcher of the future. I think last season, that jump in power from, I believe, 6 homers to like 24, it was a huge jump. And then you factor in the doubles, that's for real. I think that's going to stay, which is why I think in the future, 2026, you're going to see Augustin Ramirez eventually move to first base, designated hitter. I know they want to keep him there, but I think me and you both agree that it's just that's not going to be his position of the future. The bat is his ticket to every day getting time in the majors.
Yeah, and there have been already a couple of games where I've been able to see him catch, and trying to compare notes where it was last year, because I was really underwhelmed by what I saw from him in AAA as a defensive catcher last year. It's not just one thing; it's basically every facet of catching that needed improvement in a way that, even though you could point to somebody that had sort of limited catching experience above rookie ball, that being said, it's not a brand new position for him, and they're just certain traits, just his handwork, his hands and his footwork and his transferability, the sort of things that if all of them are concerns, it's hard to imagine a scenario where they're all addressed at the same time. The early glimpses this spring, if nothing else, it still stands out that as a blocker and just as a general receiver, I don't think the hands are going to be there. I think it's something that if you're paired with certain pitchers, that's something that this is where the intangibles kind of come into play, where certain borderline pitches, if they're not positioned well for strikes, if you're allowing extra base runner advancements because you're not blocking a ball cleanly or not transferring it quickly, I think it's just hard to get the best out of your pitchers if you're making these little subtle mistakes that might not even be reflected in the box score or count as errors. I think it's just going to be hard for major league pitchers to kind of put up with that unless he magically takes a leap forward. With him, it's all about the bat, and that is what I mentioned before. And what makes me really excited is that it's just a really well-rounded hitter. And this is a team that absolutely will make room for a well-rounded hitter at whatever position they're able to play, even if they're not able to play a position, even if he's just going to be a DH. I think even as a DH, he could add considerable value to this team for the next handful of years.
Coming up in the final segment, we're going to quickly touch on the changes that Miami has made from the last calendar year. Is there anything that we would do differently? That's going to come up right after this. And I thank you guys for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. Be sure to check out Locked On MLB as well for more comprehensive everyday coverage of everything going on around the league. I'm here with Ely Sussman. Peter Bendix came into the organization a little over a year ago, and there's been sweeping changes throughout, from personnel, from coaching staff, players on the field. It's a big difference. And my question to you is there any changes, any moves in particular that you would have done differently, whether that's the timing of it, trades, anything stand out to you?
Yeah, this is a complicated one, and I know I need to be kind of concise here, just because from Bendix's perspective, I don't know if I can fault him for the way that he has handled this.
Yeah.
His priority, I think, understandably, I think he has to look out for his own long-term job security, and he comes into this job and he tells Bruce Sherman that I need some patience from you. I need a few years to blow this up and to build this up all on my own, and we're going to spend less money, and we're probably not going to win many games, but we're going to come out on the other side looking better, because that gives him this long runway in order to get things set up. And so now because expectations are so low for the major league team, he has a while for this to really play out in the player development organization. It's taken a while to hire everybody he wants to, but now he's given himself this long runway in order to test all these ideas and try to find what this Marlins team can do to get a competitive edge. So I don't know if I was in his position, how much I would do differently, just because he's bought himself a lot of time in order to build this up in his own likeness and see its best results. At the same time, I think the issue last year, from when he took over to when they got to the trade deadline, and even before that, the morale in the Marlins organization, I thought, got really low. Not just from the fan base overall, but even inside the organization. That the way that Bendix led last year, And ultimately, he ends up firing dozens and dozens of people that were in that organization. So you can understand why morale was as low as it was. But at the same time, like, this organization hasn't necessarily made itself appealing to people looking to work in it. It hasn't made itself appealing at all to players at any stage of their career trying to come here, because of the way he's both handled things behind the scenes and the public messaging that he's given out as well. That's been really vague and sometimes just outright. I think you've done a good job of calling him out for outright lying at separate
Yeah.
times over the course of this year about what he was going to do, about how he valued certain players in a way. So I like to believe that if I was in his position, that my messaging would be a little bit more transparent in a way that would get buy-in from various levels of the organization and the fan base itself. One thing that I'm preparing for Fish on First is a look back at how in the last few years, the Marlins haven't signed a single player to a contract extension of any length whatsoever. And it's one of the longest droughts in team history. I thought when Bendix came in here, like looking at the Rays as a template, that a key to this was going to be signing young players to extensions before they really break out, certainly before they get deep into their arbitration years, and reaching a place where maybe there's somebody you build around if they take a step forward. And if nothing else, there's somebody that you maximize their trade value by like signing them to an extension when you have the leverage to do so, and then taking advantage of that later as a trade chip. And for him to just kind of sit back and let it play out, we've seen so many different moves where not like a single one has brought back a huge return. And at the same time, we're at a point where the one big asset they have left is Sandy Alcantara, because of the extension that his previous front office signed him to as well. And that's going to bear fruit for Bendix. But over this first, year and a half on the job, I feel like there were opportunities to sign relatively low risk extensions that could have paid off later. One that actually sticks out to me is, I think if I was in his position, I would have held on to Jesus Luzardo and seriously looked into what an extension would have looked like this spring. I know that was a hot topic a year ago, but at a time where I thought that would have been cost prohibitive, with Luzardo coming off the best year of his career and getting through that year fully healthy. I don't know if it would have made sense at that time, but this is a guy that was very transparent about wanting to stay in South Florida, and somebody that was coming off a pretty lost year last year. At the same time, he's somebody that, as a pitcher, checks so many of the boxes that the Marlins seem to look for in all the current pitchers that are popping this spring. Somebody that has really great raw stuff, fastball velo, multiple secondary pitches, somebody that is very receptive to feedback on his pitch analytics and making those adjustments, and somebody that is more so about the quality of his pitching in per inning spurts rather than the durability. I think his actual priorities as a pitcher align really well with this organization. And to go beyond that, just the fact that how much it would have meant, I think, to the entire community to have somebody that grew up a Marlins fan be a part of this organization and proudly represent this organization. I feel like there are examples, with Luzardo being the one that sticks out right now, that I feel like even though there's promise on the horizon on the pitching front, there would be even more so, in my opinion, if Luzardo was in place in addition to these other arms surrounding them. So I feel like there have been some missed opportunities in order to better define really anybody on this team that is part of the team's future, rather than to have all these players on edge after seeing what happened last year. The volume of trades that were made last year, even some that didn't really move the needle in terms of improving the farm system. I think you set this culture. Well, I wouldn't even say culture. I mean, you just set this tone around the organization where I think players worry about their job security and probably don't feel a whole lot of mutual loyalty between themselves and the organization, just because of the willingness to flip these guys whenever the value is right.
And they're in Miami, and they're just at some points waiting to get out of Miami to be in a better place where they can compete and the culture is more established. With Luzardo, really quick before we get out of here, that was one of the things I was going to bring up because I hated the timing of it. I don't know why they traded him coming off of an injury, and I wonder, back after 2023, after the playoff season, Luzardo pitched a great season that year. There was trade rumors surrounding him. I know the Orioles, the Brewers ended up trading Joey Ortiz, or they acquired Joey Ortiz, but he was somebody that was, theoretically a player that could have been over to Miami for Luzardo, turned into a really good everyday regular for Milwaukee. And it was like a missed opportunity because then they waited, they kept him, decided not to add to the team. He ends up getting hurt before the trade deadline, which is everybody expected him to get traded at that point. So then he misses the rest of the season, and then you still trade him when he's not at his peak value. I felt like that was just not the right way to execute a trade moving forward. And I say that because Sandy Alcantara is the biggest trade chip the Marlins have and have had for a while now, probably back to the Christian Yelich trade or JT Realmuto, Christian Yelich, Sandy Alcantara can get that type of return back. They have to execute this trade. Really quickly, before we leave, does he get traded this year, Eli, this season? And if so, which month?
I do think I do think Sandy gets traded this year. I wouldn't call it a lock. There's a lot of volatility with even for somebody as reliable as him, some question in terms of what his health is going to look like over the course of the season, and ultimately comes down to, as you mentioned there's so much riding on getting it right if and when they do trade him that they're not going to force it if the offer isn't commensurate with his value and what they think he should be. I do think is the likely outcome in July, leading up to the deadline, if he's healthy, if he's performing really well. So that is my expectation with him. That's the reason why I'm going to savor every single performance he has left. It's been such a joy following his entire career because he's somebody from the very beginning that has surpassed my expectations from every single stage of his career, just being a little bit better than I thought he would be, making adjustments I didn't think were coming. And even right now, we do this game at Fish on First where we try to predict who's going to make the opening day roster a few months ahead of time. And I was a little ambivalent about Sandy because I'm like, are we sure that his rehab is going to go exactly according to schedule? Are we sure that his stuff is going to return 100% to what it was before Tommy John? And the early indications are extremely encouraging with that respect. So I look forward to a few more months of him surpassing my expectations. And then no doubt this is going to be a huge conversation topic for you, for me, and for all corners of the Marlins community, just because of the impact that he's already had during his Marlins career.
Absolutely. And Eli, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on Locked On Marlins. I do appreciate talking baseball with you as always.
Yeah, my pleasure as well, Jeremiah.
And that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Marlins. Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section and go check out Fish on First if you haven't already. Most of you, I'm sure, already do. And with that, stay safe and let's go fish.